It all began with the unmistakable stench of rotting garbage one Tuesday morning. I stepped outside, expecting the usual occasional mess from wildlife or wind-blown debris. Instead, I found a pile of trash dumped directly onto my property, right by the side of my driveway. And, of course, the culprit was immediately obvious. Karen, the infamous HOA enforcer. Her audacity never ceased to amaze me. She had somehow decided that my property was fair game for her personal grievances, and this time she had escalated beyond the petty complaints, trespassing, and overreach I had seen before. Garbage, bags of it, haphazardly piled, was strewn across my land, a blatant provocation meant to intimidate and assert control. I could almost hear her smug internal monologue. This will teach them a lesson about HOA rules. I took a deep breath and began documenting everything. Every bag of trash, every piece of debris, every mark on my property was photographed and cataloged. Security cameras had already recorded her approach, the act of dumping the garbage, and her triumphant retreat. This was no longer just a nuisance. It was harassment, trespassing, and a potential violation of environmental regulations. I decided to let things unfold for a moment. Karen lingered nearby, apparently expecting me to confront her, beg her to remove it, or become flustered. Instead, I remained calm, surveying the scene. Then, I called in the reinforcements, the Environmental Protection Agency. Yes, the EPA. My property had been properly registered and maintained, with all permits and environmental protections in place. Karen, however, had no idea that dumping garbage, even small amounts, on private property could trigger an official investigation. Within hours, vehicles with EPA markings arrived, and agents began inspecting the site. Karen, still nearby and attempting to maintain her usual air of authority, was caught off guard when they approached her. "Ma'am," one agent said politely but firmly, "are you aware that dumping garbage on private property constitutes an environmental violation?" Karen sputtered, her face flushing red. She tried to claim ignorance, suggesting she was merely enforcing HOA rules, but the agents were unamused. They documented her actions, spoke with witnesses, and even consulted the security footage I had provided. Meanwhile, I watched from the porch, calm and collected, knowing full well that Karen had underestimated the consequences of her behavior. The EPA, though professional and courteous, had a zero-tolerance policy for unauthorized dumping. Karen realized, far too late, that her attempt to intimidate had triggered an entirely different form of authority, one she could not control or manipulate. Within a week, Karen had been formally cited for her actions. The HOA board, embarrassed and wary of legal liability, issued a public reprimand and clarified that her actions were unauthorized and unacceptable. The neighborhood buzzed with the story, whispering about how Karen had escalated a petty feud into a legal and environmental disaster for herself. Her reputation, already precarious, took another hit. As for me, the cleanup was straightforward. The EPA ensured that the garbage was removed and properly disposed of, and my property remained pristine. But the satisfaction went beyond mere cleanliness. Karen had learned, painfully, publicly, and irrevocably, that overreach, arrogance, and disregard for boundaries have consequences far beyond what she could imagine. From my porch, overlooking my now spotless land, I reflected on the lesson. Karen had thought she could assert dominance through intimidation and petty sabotage. Instead, she had invited federal attention and public humiliation. It was a stark reminder that preparation, calm authority, and knowing the rules can turn even the most audacious provocations into decisive victories. Every time I walked past the spot where the garbage had been dumped, I couldn't help but smile. Karen had underestimated me, underestimated the law, and underestimated the consequences of her actions. And in doing so, she had cemented herself as a cautionary tale. Never trespass, never provoke, and never assume authority where none exists.